license, registration, and proof of insurance. Do you know why I stopped you today?
My documents are in the glove box. May I reach for them, officer?
Go ahead, slowly. Where are you coming from with all that?
You never think a broken license plate light at 5:15 p.m. on a crowded interstate is going to cost the city $750,000. But when a routine delay quietly shifts into an unlawful detention, the line between public safety and a constitutional violation is crossed in a matter of minutes, leaving a trail of evidence that a judge simply cannot ignore. The sun was beginning its low, blinding descent over Interstate 95, casting long, sharp shadows across the 6 lanes of crawling rush hour traffic inside a charcoal gray SUV. The ambient temperature was a comfortable 70 degrees, contrasting sharply with the sweltering late summer heat radiating off the asphalt outside. Marcus Thorne, 34, an architect with a penchant for precision, kept a light grip on the steering wheel. He tapped his left thumb against the leather in a rhythmic, unconscious habit, his eyes moving between the brake lights of the semi-truck ahead and his rearview mirror. In the passenger seat, David Lynn, his 35-year-old friend and lead structural engineer, was slouched comfortably, scrolling through dense digital blueprints on an iPad. The soft, rhythmic hum of an architecture podcast played over the car's speakers, blending with the muffled roar of thousands of commuters trying to make their way home. They were exhausted, returning from a grueling 8-hour site inspection on the industrial outskirts of the city, their closed button-down shirts with the sleeves rolled up, dust-scuffed boots, and safety vests tossed haphazardly into the back seat alongside hard hats. Laser levels and measuring tapes told the story of a long day of honest work. They had just passed the exit for the downtown corridor when Marcus noticed it. The sudden, unmistakable flash of red and blue lights cutting through the glare of the setting sun in his rearview mirror. A heavy police cruiser had merged aggressively from the left lane, falling directly behind Marcus's bumper. Marcus blinked, his stomach giving that involuntary, familiar drop that anyone feels when a police car signals them. He checked his speedometer. He was doing 45 in a 55 zone, moving with the sluggish flow of the crowd. He hadn't swerved. He hadn't cut anyone off. Marcus turned down the volume on the podcast. David looked up from his iPad, the blue light of the screen reflecting off his glasses. He frowned, glancing over his shoulder. The cruiser's siren gave a short, authoritative yelp, indicating Marcus needed to pull over immediately. Putting his turn signal on, Marcus navigated the heavy SUV across the right lane, tires crunching onto the narrow, gravel-strewn shoulder of the highway. The noise in the cabin shifted from a quiet hum to a deafening roar as cars and 18-wheelers blasted past them at highway speeds, shaking the frame of the SUV. With every passing gust of wind, Marcus shifted the car into park, rolled down all 4 windows, a habit his father had taught him to ensure total transparency, and placed both hands at the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel. David quietly closed his iPad, sliding it into his messenger bag, his posture stiffening just slightly. Neither of them spoke. The air inside the car had grown thick with unspoken tension. In the side mirror, Marcus watched the door of the cruiser open. Officer Thomas Hayes stepped out. Hayes was a 12-year veteran of the force, a supervisor of the Regional Highway Interdiction Team. He was not a cartoon villain. He was a deeply cynical man who had spent over a decade pulling over smugglers, drug runners, and criminals on this exact stretch of road. That experience had built a profound underlying bias to Hayes. The highway was a hunting ground, and every driver was a potential suspect. He relied heavily on his gut instinct, a dangerous metric that often disguised subjective assumptions as objective police work. Hayes approached the passenger side of the SUV, a common tactical maneuver to keep away from the dangerous flow of traffic. His heavy boots crunched against the gravel. He paused at the rear bumper, Placing a hand on the trunk to leave a fingerprint standard procedure before appearing in David's open window, Hayes leaned in slightly, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the dusty interior of the SUV. The smell of exhaust fumes and hot asphalt poured into the car. When he spoke, his voice was smooth, practiced, and carried an undercurrent of authority that demanded absolute compliance. He did not introduce himself immediately. He simply asked for a driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. Marcus, moving deliberately, announced that he was reaching into his glove compartment for the paperwork, retrieved it, and passed it across David to the officer. Hayes looked at the documents, then looked at the two men. His eyes drifted to the back seat, scanning the heavy tool bags, the hard hats, the coiled extension cords, and the expensive laser surveying equipment. In Hayes' mind, a subtle narrative began to form. Earlier that afternoon, dispatch had put out a vague "be on the lookout" bulletin, Orbolo, for a dark-colored SUV involved in a string of high-end commercial burglaries in the neighboring county. The suspects were reported to be heavily equipped with tools used to bypass security systems. Hayes looked at Marcus, who was sitting rigid, staring straight ahead. He looked at David, who was quiet, making minimal eye contact. To Hayes, their restrained demeanor didn't read as exhaustion or the natural anxiety of a traffic stop. To his biased eye, it read as evasiveness. It read as guilt. Where are we coming from today? Gentlemen, Hayes asked, his tone shifting from procedural to investigative. A commercial job site out in the industrial park. Marcus answered clearly, keeping his voice steady. We're architects and engineers, just heading home. Hayes nodded slowly, tapping the edge of Marcus's license against his chin. Industrial park, right? You guys do a lot of late in the day work out there. Looks like you've got a lot of heavy gear for just drawing pictures. The comment was faintly patronizing, designed to elicit a reaction. David bristled slightly but kept his mouth shut. Marcus swallowed the rising irritation in his throat. It's standard surveying equipment, officer. We were doing structural measurements. Is there a problem with how I was driving? Hayes didn't answer the question directly. The light above your license plate is out, makes the plate unreadable from a distance. That's a moving violation. He took a step back, gesturing vaguely toward the rear of the car. I'm going to run your information. Sit tight. Hayes retreated to his cruiser. Inside the heavily air-conditioned cab, he sat before his mobile data terminal and ran the names Marcus Thorne, David Lynn. The system churned for a few seconds before returning the results. Both records were immaculate. No warrants, no criminal history, no prior moving violations in the last 5 years. The vehicle was registered properly, insured, and not reported stolen. By every legal metric, the purpose of the traffic stop had been fulfilled. Hayes had the information he needed to write a simple warning or a citation for the broken plate light, but Hayes couldn't shake his gut feeling. He looked at the bolo on his screen, dark SUV. 2 suspects, burglary tools. It was an incredibly broad description that could fit thousands of vehicles in the metro area, but confirmation bias had already taken root in the officer's mind. He keyed his shoulder mic, opening a channel to dispatch. Unit 4 to Central. I've got a dark gray SUV pulled over on I-95 South. Mille Mager Togfører, 2 occupants, a lot of heavy equipment in the back. Doesn't sit right with me. Start a K9 unit my way. Dispatch confirmed, noting that a K9 unit was approximately 15 to 20 minutes out due to the heavy rush hour gridlock. Here is where the strict boundaries of the United States Constitution come into play. Under the 4th Amendment, which protects citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures, a routine traffic stop is a temporary detention. The Supreme Court has explicitly ruled in cases like Rodriguez v. United States, that the police may not extend the duration of a traffic stop beyond the time reasonably required to complete its original mission, which means checking the license, writing the ticket, and handling any outstanding warrants. To lawfully hold a driver longer than that, an officer must possess independent, reasonable, articulable suspicion that a separate crime is actively occurring, a vague hunch, a generalized BOLO, and the presence of legal work tools do not meet that threshold. Back in the SUV, the minutes dragged on in agonizing slow motion. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. The sun dropped lower, casting an eerie orange glow over the dashboard. Marcus tapped the steering wheel, the rhythm erratic. Now, what is taking so long? He muttered. Looking in the mirror, he could see Hayes sitting in the cruiser, illuminated by the glow of his laptop, doing absolutely nothing. David shifted uncomfortably. Did you have anything to drink at lunch? Anything in the car? No. Nothing. This is ridiculous. It's a license plate light. Marcus replied, his voice tight. The power imbalance was suffocating. They were trapped on the side of a roaring highway, entirely at the mercy of a man who had isolated them without explanation. At the 22-minute mark, a second police vehicle, a specialized K9 SUV, pulled up behind Hayes' cruiser with its lights flashing. The situation instantly escalated. Marcus and David watched in a mix of confusion and rising dread as a second officer stepped out, opened the rear door of his vehicle, and brought out a restless German shepherd. Hayes finally walked back up to the passenger window. His demeanor had grown colder, more authoritative. All right, gentlemen, here's the deal. We've had a lot of commercial burglaries in this area. And frankly, your story seems a little rehearsed. And you've got a lot of tools back there. My partner here is going to run his dog around the exterior of your vehicle. I need both of you to step out of the car and stand by the guardrail. Officer, wait. Marcus said, his voice rising over the deafening traffic. You pulled me over for a license plate light. Why are we doing a dog sniff? I gave you my ID. I told you where we work. Step out of the vehicle. Sir. Now. Hayes commanded, his hand resting casually but purposefully near his duty belt. It wasn't a request. It was a lawful order under police safety protocols. But the underlying context was deeply coercive, swallowing his pride and his growing anger. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt. He and David stepped out into the chaotic, deafening environment of the highway shoulder. They were directed to stand against the rusted metal guardrail as hundreds of commuters drove past, slowing down to stare. The humiliation burned in Marcus's chest. To the passing world, they looked like criminals caught in the act. They were two professionals standing in the dust, subjected to a public spectacle based on absolutely nothing but an officer's misguided intuition. The K9 handler began his walk around. He led the dog tightly around the perimeter of the SUV, tapping the sides of the vehicle, dragging his hand along the doors to direct the dog's nose. When they reached the rear tailgate, the handler tapped the seam. The dog paused, sniffed aggressively, and then sat down. I've got an alert. The handler shouted over the traffic. Under the law, a positive alert from a trained narcotics or contraband dog provides probable cause to search the interior of a vehicle without a warrant. But dog alerts are notoriously subjective, highly influenced by handler bias, and often trigger on residual odors or nothing at all. Based on this alert, Hayes and the handler spent the next 45 minutes systematically dismantling the interior of Marcus's SUV. They pulled out the expensive laser equipment, dropping it onto the gravel. They unzipped tool bags, dumping wrenches and tape measures onto the seats. They emptied the glove compartment, scattering registration papers and receipts. Marcus and David stood on the shoulder for over an hour. Watching their professional lives be picked apart and scrutinized, they found nothing. No stolen goods, no contraband. No drugs. Just the mundane, boring tools of two structural professionals trying to do their jobs. When it was over, the interior of the SUV looked like it had been ransacked. Hayes, realizing his gut had completely failed him, walked back over to Marcus. There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement of the humiliation or the fear he had instilled. Instead, Hayes handed Marcus a printed piece of paper. Here is a written warning for the license plate light. Get it fixed. You guys are free to go. Marcus took the paper, his hands trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and profound indignity. He and David silently packed their equipment back into the car, brushed the gravel off their clothes, and pulled back onto the highway. The physical stop was over, but the psychological impact had just begun. Marcus Thorne was not a man who let things go, especially when they involved systemic overreach. The very next morning, he contacted a civil rights attorney, being precise and analytical. Marcus understood that the key to his case was not his emotional distress, but the procedural timeline of the stop itself. His attorney immediately filed a preservation letter with the city police department demanding all dashcam footage, body-worn camera video, radio dispatch logs, and mobile data terminal keystroke records from the encounter. When the city's legal department reviewed the requested evidence, they expected to find a routine, justifiable search. Instead, they uncovered a textbook constitutional violation captured in pristine high-definition audio and video. The twist in the case wasn't a dramatic courtroom confession. It was a quiet, damning revelation buried in the metadata of the dashcam footage. During discovery, Marcus's attorney synced the bodycam audio with the timestamp of the mobile data terminal inside Hayes' cruiser. The evidence revealed a glaring, undeniable truth. Exactly 8 minutes into the traffic stop, Officer Hayes had completed typing out the written warning for the broken license plate light. He had pressed print. The warning had materialized in his cruiser. At that exact second, the legal justification for detaining Marcus and David had ended, but the dashcam audio caught Hayes speaking to his K9 unit over the radio right after the warning printed. "Yeah, I've got the warning written up." Hayes was heard saying, his voice muffled by the cruiser's cabin, "But I'm holding on to it. These guys look way too stiff. Put a rush on that dog. I need something to justify the hold before I hand this ticket over." It was a smoking gun. It was definitive proof of an intentional, unlawful extension of a traffic stop. Hayes had intentionally delayed the completion of the stop solely to wait for a dog, possessing zero reasonable suspicion to do so. He had crossed the line from a lawful traffic enforcement action into an illegal, unconstitutional seizure. The Fourth Amendment had been violated the second the clock ticked past, the moment that warning ticket was printed and deliberately withheld. The lawsuit was filed in federal court, alleging civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. The city's lawyers attempted to argue qualified immunity, the legal doctrine that shields government officials from liability unless they violate a clearly established statutory or constitutional right. But the judge presiding over the pretrial hearing struck the defense down with brutal efficiency. The judge's ruling was scathing. He cited the Supreme Court's ruling in Rodriguez, stating unequivocally that the city had crossed the line. A police officer's hunch does not suspend the Constitution. The judge wrote, in his opinion, the moment the citation was ready, the defendants were legally obligated to allow the plaintiffs to leave. Every second they were detained after that point was an act of unlawful imprisonment. Faced with a devastating public trial, undeniable video evidence, and a judge who had already telegraphed his ruling, the city folded. They settled the lawsuit out of court for $750,000, but the consequences extended far beyond a municipal check. The dashcam footage was obtained by local news outlets through a public records request. The video of Hayes casually admitting to holding two innocent men on the side of a dangerous highway to satisfy his own biased curiosity went viral. The public scrutiny was immense. Citizens demanded accountability. Following an intense internal affairs investigation, Officer Hayes was suspended without pay. His regional highway interdiction team, which had been generating complaints for years under the guise of aggressive policing, was quietly disbanded and restructured under strict new oversight protocols. The department was forced to implement mandatory agency-wide retraining on Fourth Amendment boundaries and the strict limitations of traffic stop durations. Marcus and David took their settlement, but the money didn't erase the memory of standing on the side of that highway, watching the cars go by, feeling entirely stripped of their autonomy. It changed how they drove. It changed how they spoke. It changed the lingering, unspoken anxiety they felt every time a police cruiser pulled up behind them in traffic. The true gravity of a traffic stop isn't just about the ticket. It's about the massive asymmetrical imbalance of power that exists on the shoulder of a road. It is an environment where an individual's constitutional rights are entirely in the hands of the officer standing at the window. When those officers rely on unchecked bias rather than objective facts, the very foundation of public trust begins to crack. Which leaves us with a question to consider the next time you see those flashing lights in your rearview mirror. If the laws designed to protect us can be so easily suspended by a single person's gut feeling, how secure are our rights? Really, we must demand that the agents of our security are held to the absolute highest standards of the law, because the moment we accept shortcuts in the name of safety, we have already surrendered our freedom.